Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the Kadas Gambit, which derives from the Scandinavian Defense, which is pawn e4 and then d5. And after the pawn takes here, one of the most common moves from black is to play knight f6. It's slightly more common for black to take here with this queen, but after the queen takes, knight to c3, forcing the queen to come back. White gains a tempo. So a lot of players just prefer to play the move knight f6, which is a great way to continue. And also think it gives you a lot more options to play fun openings. So if they play pawn to c4 to hold on to it, you could play the Icelandic Gambit, one of my favorite openings in chess with e6 here. One of the most common ways for black to continue here is just to play the move d4. It says, hey, if you want to take this pawn here, that's fine. If you take with your queen, then they can still come here and play c3, forcing the queen back here. If you want to move your knight twice here to d5, that's fine as well. That's definitely worth it to give back that pawn in material. Now, I have another video if you want to look at the Portuguese Gambit. That's if black plays bishop here to g4. But in the Kadas Gambit, black actually plays the move c6. So pawn takes here on c6. And then instead of taking the natural knight takes here on c6, black's going to give up another pawn to material, and that is the move pawn to e5. Now we are going to be looking at the accepted line. That's the pawn takes here on e5, and I think it's difficult for white to find a better move here. It's the most natural. Hey, if black wants to give me 3 pawns in material, haven't given up any on the white side, all of a sudden this is attacking the knight here on f6. If the queens want to come off the board, if you're up in material, many times you want to just trade down as much as material as possible. That leaves your opponent with fewer pieces to attack. So this all looks good for white, and black's going to continue down that same path, exchanging queens here on d1. The king takes, but now black's going to start to activate pieces more proactively, starting with the move knight to g4. And you can see the immediate threat is the knight coming here to f2. This is forking the king and the rook, so that would be extremely bad for white. But you can also see it's attacking this pawn here on e5. So yes, black is down 3 pawns in material, but they are now looking to attack. Both of the bishops can easily get involved into the game, get activated here, so they have a lot of threats. Now, we are going to be looking at specifically a few options. The first one is knight to h3. This is defending this pawn here on f2. We're also going to be looking at what happens if the pawn just takes here on b7. So those are the 2 common ones I think you'll see. The first one we'll look at is knight to h3 here. And then we're going to go ahead and take with our knight here on c6. We're still threatening this square here on f2, and we've almost kept this knight here on h3 from moving. It can't go anywhere because then we could just take this piece right here. And we're also attacking this pawn here on e5 with some future threats of the knight coming here to d4 as well. So if they want to hold on to this pawn, remember now we're only down 2 pawns in material, they could try something like pawn to f4. Yeah, that pawn's already under attack, so you might as well just come up here and support the central pawn here. Now black's going to play the move bishop here to f5, and this does a couple things. One, it attacks this c2 square, which is only being defended by the king, but it also opens up for black to play the move king to c8 and castle on the queen side, getting this rook over here to d8, putting it on the same file as the king is always going to be good. Now, if we kind of look at some of the ways that white would really want to defend this, one of those would be, okay, let's go ahead and play bishop here to d3. This is supported by the pawn here on c2. It opens up for the rook to now get involved into the game, and it does block this file so that the king is no longer immediate threat if black decides to castle. We are going to castle on the queen side right away, so castle here. And now it comes down to how is white going to continue. They have a few options. They could play knight to c3 here. They could say, okay, we really need to get our king off of this file, so they could play something like king to e2. King to e2, however, is going to be a mistake, and that's because we have the move knight to d4. Attacking the king here. Now, where does the king go? The threat here that we have is attacking this square here on c2. So they could decide, let's go ahead and play king to d2 to try to hold on to this. But we can actually just take right here. They can't take with their bishop because that's being pinned down by the rook here on d8. But if they take with their king here, we can actually just take with our rook on d3. And now they are in a really tough spot. You can see the king cannot move. All the squares are being attacked by the rook here, so it's stuck. And then as soon as the rook moves, there's going to be a discovered check with the bishop here on f5. So that's some logical moves that white may go down, but all of them are going to result in a very, very easy victory for black. Let's come back a few moves, and instead of playing king to d2, because we recognize that's not going to end well, maybe they play king to e1. Okay, well, now we're just going to take the bishop here on d3, and as soon as the pawn comes here to d3, we can play knight to c2. This is forking the rook here on a1. It's going to fall, but even if they don't have their king here on e1, maybe they recognize that's going to be a bad spot, so they come back here to king to f1. It doesn't really help anything because bishop takes, pawn exchanges here, and then knight to c2. It's no longer check, but the rook is still trapped, and now the king here on f1 is blocking the rook here on h1. So all in all, this is going to be a pretty tough spot for them to be in. So if we look at it and say, hey, the king coming here to e2, getting off this d file, seems logical, but you can tell there's just so many threats that black has. There's no way for them to stop after the knight comes up here to d4. So that is not going to work. Another option that they have is knight coming here to c3. Now from here, I like black playing the move pawn to f6. And the first time you look at it, it's like, man, there's so many other threats. How do you play pawn to f6? And really, the thought is that after the pawn takes here, we take with our pawn here on f6, and this does a few things. But one of the things it does is it stops this knight here on h3. Yes, black is still down a little bit in material, but this knight we already talked about can't come to f2 because that's being attacked by the knight here on g4. So this knight has a lot of threats. It's attacking this square here on f2, but it also eventually is attacking this square here on e3. So it's keeping this dark square bishop from really getting involved into the game. And you can see now the knight here on h3, it would like to come to g5, but this pawn here on f6 is really stopping that. This also opens up the door for the dark square bishop if it wanted to come here to h6, but many times it's just going to come over here to b4, where I think the most logical place for it is going to be coming here to c5, just centralizing it, just attacking as many central squares as possible. So I think c5 makes a lot of sense, and then black can even swing the other rook over to the e file and really attack on that front as well. So if we come back a few more moves after we take the pawn here on c6 with knight to c6, we looked at, let's say they play pawn to f4. Now they could try to protect this with another move, let's say bishop to b4. That gets another piece involved into the game. So things are going to be slightly different if we look at the same things that we did before. So bishop here to f5. Attacking the c2 square, preparing to castle on the queen side. Maybe they still do the same thing with bishop here to d3. We castle on the queen side. They play king here to e2. We play knight to d4. King d2, again, not the best moves, but I want to show you how this slight change with the bishop coming out would change things for white's perspective. Now we take here on c2. They take here. But after the rook takes on d3, they have the move king to c1. They're still in a really tough spot, don't get me wrong, because now we play bishop here to c5, and we just have so much more material involved into the game. Remember, they have the knight here on h3. We eventually may still want to play our f6 and then take here so they can't come over here to g5 and threaten our f7 square. But you can see the rook here on a1 is not going anywhere. Very easy for us to bring our rook over here to d8 and attack. But this is how it's going to be different if that bishop comes here to f4 instead of the pawn coming here. The last thing we're going to look at is if the pawn takes here on b7. Now, I think this is the better play for white. Although many players, I think when they analyze this, they might feel like pawn taking here on b7 is a bad move because bishop takes here on b7. And now black has a lot of threats. This bishop here on b7 is eyeing down this long light square diagonal here. And so they may say, oh my goodness, I just allowed my opponent to gain a tempo here and now attack a lot of the critical squares on the board. So they may decide, hey, I'm already up in material. I don't think I should go ahead and trade off the pawns here on b7. I actually do think it is the better play for white. So now they still have to worry about the move knight takes here on f2. That's not going away even if they decide to exchange here on b7. So I still think knight to h3 is still a very logical play for them to make. You know, if they want to play something like bishop here to e3, exchange off some material, they can do that. We can also just take the pawn here on e5. So we have a lot of options. We can get our dark square bishop involved into the game. Knight here to c6 as well makes a lot of sense. So we can go ahead and castle on the queen side. But knight to h3, I think, is going to be a very logical play that you'll see. Knight to c6. The main difference is, you know, on the previous variations, we were bringing our bishop here to f5. That's not going to be the case because the bishop here is on b7. But that does not matter when it comes to castling. So if they still play the pawn to f4, we're still going to castle on the queen side. We have a lot of similar threats as before. The main difference that you'll see now is I don't think white's going to play bishop here to d3 because our bishop's not here on f5. I mean, they could, but I don't think they will. I think they're more inclined to play something like bishop here to d2. And if that's the case, we can still play knight to d4, but it's for a different reason. Now this is opening up for the light square bishop to attack. The other time we were doing it is to actually attack the king, which sometimes could come to e2. If the king does come to e2, yes, we're still going to be playing knight to d4 to check the king, which I think would be an ultra bad move from white, but just want to give you an idea of some of the stuff you should be looking out for in this opening. So maybe they play knight to c3 here. We can get our dark square bishop involved into the game, bring our rook over here. We can obviously play the pawn to f6 at some point, exchange here, so we can block off the knight coming here to g5. So a lot of the same principles that you've seen earlier in the video are going to apply even if they take that pawn here on b7. So that is the Kadas Gambit. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. The Scandinavian Defense has a lot of fun gambits to play, so hopefully you can add this into your repertoire if you like to play d5 when you face e4. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe, hit the like button, and then comment below. Let me know what you guys thought of this video. If there's others you want me to make, feel free to let me know that as well. Always looking for ideas for new videos. But thank you so much for watching the video. I appreciate the support. I'll see you guys next time.